The Paris Peace Forum was built in 2018 with the idea that global collaboration can be reinvented from the bottom up, and that impactful solutions already exist out there. And unfortunately, some of those solutions fall short in achieving their objective and having a systemic change in global governance. And that's where the Scale Up program comes in.
Every year, we have a call for solutions from which 60 projects are showcased at our annual event at the Paris Peace Forum. Out of those projects, we have 10 projects that are selected by a jury to benefit from the year of scale-up support. We try to help them determine the objectives that they want to change within that 1 year with the mentors.
Le rôle d'un mentor est celui de, disons, aider à rester concentré, de dire la vérité, de créer et de faciliter des connexions, des relations, et de donner des conseils.
Often the hardest part is to not just get in the room, but to know how to, who to talk to and what things and issues matter to the people you're engaging with. So our mentors were really helpful across all those things.
What was more rewarding is to see that we were able to take the SCUP project from point A to point B, supporting the growth of the project, identifying the blind spots, and helping the project leaders to make significant progress over the course of 1 year.
The Scale program has 3 pillars. So firstly, we have the mentorship, where each project is paired up with 2 high-level experts, the capacity building workshops every month, and a support from the Paris Peace Forum Secretariat.
The types of projects are very diverse and they come from all over the world.
The first day that the war in Ukraine started, we put all our regular activity on hold and we started building the digital infrastructure that was needed by the refugees coming into Romania.
Josia est un programme pour sauvegarder le patrimoine en situation d'urgence. Faire partie du Scale Up programme nous a permis de réaliser à quel point nous agissons pour la paix.
Empatia is a project that promotes the use of AI to solve public issues such as health, development, or climate change.
The purpose of the initiative is to create collaboration on environmental issues across the India-Pakistan border on issues like air pollution, water usage, and sustainable agriculture.
The Scale Up program is an accelerator of global governance solutions. We aim to help project teams be better equipped to influence and challenge governance, and ultimately help them amplify their impact and their reach.
Being recognized for the work we were trying to do to make change globally out of Africa and out of the global south was part of what the Scale Up Award meant for us.
We've had a phenomenal year throughout the SCUP program, and I think the secret to kind of growing and scaling impact is collaboration.
To both project leaders and to experts, we ask them, please join us and get involved with the Scale program.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to stand up because I realize if you don't have your headphones on, you may not know we are beginning. But we are beginning, so please do put your headphones on, and we will start at number 11, 12, or 13, depending on the language you're looking for. 11, 12, or 13. I'll give you a moment to get that ready. And I think, let me look for some thumbs up. Are people hearing me? Is this working? Yeah? Okay, good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Raj Kumar. I'm the president and editor-in-chief of DevX. We are a news organization that covers global development. We are a proud media partner here of the Paris Peace Forum. This event is an important one on the calendar for many reasons, and I know I myself have been in lots of conversations today, probably some of you have as well, about the very frontier issues, and maybe the one that's getting the most attention, that's talked about in every session, is artificial intelligence, and for very good reason, right? It's very exciting, it's also very scary. I want to argue with you today that the issue we're here to talk about is every bit as exciting, and it's every bit as scary. It has just as much promise and ambition, and just as much technological invention and opportunity as artificial intelligence. And that we ought to give it that level of focus and attention. And you're going to hear today from some people who do that every day, and I think are trying to raise that level of attention for the world, and for good reason. You know, one of the things who here has been in a session about artificial intelligence today, or heard it discussed, at least a few of you? Well, one of the big questions that you will get a big debate about is when, at what moment will the world develop what they call an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, which surpasses our own human intelligence. That will be quite a moment. I mean, imagine when that happens, what that will feel like. I think we can equally imagine what it will feel like if we reach that moment. It could be this year, it could be 10 years from now. But if we reach that moment, while we still are unable to bring basic nutrition to much of the world, that we'll have developed something beyond human capability, and we will still have failed at reaching the most basic human need. I don't want to be there. And many others don't want to be there too, and are working to address that. And we're going to talk today about how they're doing that and why there's real potential to do something that has never been done in history before. There are 5 of us on the stage. If we were replaced by children under 5, first of all, it would be a much cuter panel. You would all be paying much more attention. But also, one of the 5 would be malnourished, right? That gives you a sense of the scale today. We're talking about going to Mars, autonomous vehicles, artificial general intelligence, and we're also still not getting basic nutrition to children and people who need it, with massive consequences for our economy and our humanity. But there's a lot that can be done. And so this group before me is working on this every day. And in fact, Paris and this forum play a very big role in it, which is why I want to begin our conversation with Brieux Pont, who is the special envoy for the Nutrition for Growth Summit and the Secretary General of Nutrition for Growth, and has been leading an effort that is really fighting against all the tides and trends to wake the world up and to find an opportunity here. So I just want to begin with you, Brieux, if you would. What is this moment in nutrition? What is the opportunity? What is Nutrition for Growth trying to achieve?
Thank you, Raj, for having me. Bonjour à tous. Well, yes, the onus is on
Hello, everyone.
As a host of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. It falls to our country to host the N4G Summit, which is going to take place on the 27th and 28th of March next year. When I took this job, I started looking into the challenges that the nutrition international community is facing, and I quickly realized that N4G is quite a vulnerable process. Why? First of all, there have been only 4 N4G summit. This is now, if I'm not wrong, the 4th. Yeah, and what we see is that there was a lack. Well, we've realized there was a lack of continuity. So you can't wake up the international community every 4 years, saying, "Look, hey, can you give us more money? It's time for the beauty contest, and let's see if you can match what the previous edition has achieved." And I don't believe this is the right way to work. We need to establish continuity, so we have more coherent policies, long-term policies developed between stakeholders. Hence the idea of a troika, and we are very grateful that Japan and the United States, Japan hosted the Olympics in 2020 in Tokyo. You may have noticed, hosted the Olympics this year, and LA will host the Olympics in 2028, which leaves little choice to Australia when it will fall to them to host the Olympic Games in Brisbane. They will have to join this troika, I hope so. So that's first, for starters, continuity. Second, the vulnerability of N4G is also because it may become a sort of beauty contest, and that what you get is pledgeflation and then donors fatigue, and you don't want that. We need to, it's not about posing, but it's also about realizing that circumstances have changed. Tokyo didn't set the bar high or very high. Tokyo set the bar astronomically high. And if we allow that to happen, it will be a problem. If we need to match systematically this kind of results, it will be a problem. So let's take advantage, let's be grateful of what Tokyo has achieved, and let's focus on policy. Our message is that nutrition is a problem for everyone. Every country is affected by malnutrition. Every life cycle is affected by malnutrition. The core target is the 1,000 first days of life, of course, but it gets even to the elders that we have to take care of in what I call the fourth burden. So it's undernutrition, it's micronutrient deficiency, it's overnutrition, but it's also denutrition that we have to deal with. So plenty of things to address, and really a very challenging moment for us.
It is. It's a very challenging moment, and as you say, what I think you and others in the panel are trying to do is to really reframe it from the kind of core idea of charity to something much more dynamic, the idea of food systems, bringing in industry, bringing in the private sector, thinking about every country in the world, not just the poorest. And I think that has been a shift, Sean. I want to bring Sean Baker into the discussion as the Chief Program Officer at Helen Keller International. You know this space well. You've been doing this for 30 plus years. You were USAID's Chief Nutritionist. You led this portfolio at the Gates Foundation. Hasn't there been a shift, to Brio's point, from the way we thought about this topic in the past, the way we imagined the photos, the horrible pictures of children with big bellies, to the way we think about this now? What is that shift?
Thanks, Raj, and a huge thanks to the Paris Peace Forum for having me here. I think there has been a shift, and I think still perhaps in the public's mind, when you talk about malnutrition, it is that severely wasted child needing treatment. But in fact, the burden of malnutrition, so much of it is unseen, be it the micronutrient malnutrition, or you go into a community where no child has had healthy growth, and so just having short or stunted children is the norm. I think there's also perhaps a narrative that nutrition doesn't improve, we don't know what to do. And I think that's part of the narrative we need to change quite dramatically. There has been progress, certainly enough progress to show it's possible. The World Health Assembly adopted targets for nutrition by the year 2025, and while we're not meeting all of them, certainly on exclusive breastfeeding and stunting, or being too short for your age, there has been some dramatic improvements. And a case in point, for example, is Nepal, where if you go back to 1995, almost every child was stunted. 68% of children were stunted. They did not have the growth they needed to fuel their resistance and their cognitive development. The last national survey in 2022 shows that's down to 25%. Dramatic improvements, showing that if you do work together across these different systems, you can make dramatic progress at scale. And there are other countries that have followed suit on that. For example, Rwanda has the highest exclusive breastfeeding rate in the world. That period of time from 0 to 6 months with breast milk is what's needed. 87% of kids in that age group get exclusive breastfeeding, and it's almost eliminated wasting. That severest form of malnutrition is a public health problem. And what's behind that, and we've also seen, going back to that public image, last year was the highest number of children treated for severe wasting ever recorded in history, with 9.2 million children across the world getting this life-saving treatment. And I think the big shift has been this understanding that we need the systems to work to deliver the long term. This is not a one-off. This is really getting the health system, the food systems, and social protection to work together to make fundamental shifts in the way women and children are nourished.
I want to stay on that theme of what we've learned and what's changed with Francesco Branca, who leads this portfolio, the director for the Department of Nutrition and Food Safety at the World Health Organization. And I think there was a time when we thought if there's a problem with malnutrition, the answer must be more calories. We have to get food to kids. And even while we were trying to address that need, food systems changed a lot. and packaged foods became common in many countries, middle income, but even low income countries, the diet, the human diet has really shifted a lot in the last few decades. Tell us, what is the current issue when it comes to malnutrition? How should we think about the actual underpinning of this issue?
So, first of all, when we read the document of the Sustainable Development Goals, we hear the term all forms of malnutrition. So there's been a big shift. There's a recognition that it's not only about undernutrition, but we have, Brooke was saying it, and Sean, we have the problems of nutrition that start from conception, a child which is born too small, and that's 1 child in 5 which is born too small. Malnutrition starting during pregnancy. But then you have, of course, all the problems that happen in the first few years of life, and particularly the first 5 years. You have the problem of vitamin and mineral deficiencies. Think of a woman who is anemic, and then she's more likely to die as a result of that anemia when she gives birth, or she's not able to work, she's fatigued. And then we have this big scourge of obesity, which has now surpassed, for the first time in history, 1 billion people. 106 million are actually adolescents there. So all of that is responsible for about 8 million deaths every year. All of that is creating an enormous burden on society. We calculated that the cost of undernutrition is $1 trillion. The cost of obesity is $2 trillion. In some African countries, up to 16% of their gross domestic product is lost because of malnutrition. So that's the nutritional part. But then you mentioned the diet. Then the diet is also a big problem because the diet has been shifting. We've been consuming more and more highly processed food. In some parts of the world, up to 60% of the food we eat is actually highly processed. That's not good food. That's high in fat, sugar, and salt. That's addictive often. And again, that's also responsible for a lot of the burden of non-communicable diseases. So yes, indeed, we do have the problem of food security, and that is leading to undernutrition. But we also have a problem of a food system which is not catering for our health. Is only catering for the profit of the big industry.
Yeah, I think you're right. There was a moment in time when the cost, the cheapest food a person with limited resources could get, switched from being some kind of whole food to being a processed food. And that's happened in much of the world. And that change has obviously led to people who are struggling to make ends meet to spend more and consume more of foods that are not actually providing the nutrition they need. Maybe they're getting the calories, but we're seeing all of these new effects from sort of a new malnutrition than the way we thought of it before. I want to bring Afshan into the conversation. Afshan Khan is, of course, the UN Assistant Secretary General, and you lead the Scaling Up Nutrition movement. And I want to bring you in on something Sean started to talk about, which is the fact that this isn't a simple solution anymore. It's one of the things we've learned is it's not just going to be giving people food. It's a much more of a systems level approach that's likely to work. And he gave some examples of where it's working. You coordinate a movement of organizations at the country level working on these issues. What are you seeing on the country level that's actually working given the new context we're in today?
Thanks, Raj, and thank you to the Paris Peace Forum for the invitation to be here. This is a really important question because SUN is composed of entities that represent civil society, governments, private sector partners, including from small and medium enterprises, and UN agencies. And we clearly are very clear that we know now from the great evidence that's come from many partners what needs to be done to address malnutrition. So what and how to do it. And these cross-sectoral examples that Sean spoke about are pivotal. So nutrition ultimately is an outcome. And that means we need clear investments in health, particularly in that first 1,000 days, to influence outcomes for children. We need clear investments in social protection. And I would take almost the life cycle approach and say for a child, what they get in those first 1,000 days, what they get in school, what they get as an adolescent girl and what they get later on in life and as an adult is key. And Sun has been able to take this evidence and then facilitate and support collaboration across sectors for better outcomes for both food and nutrition security. So I'll give again a couple of practical examples. In Bangladesh, collaboration with Sun has helped get nutrition outcomes into social protection schemes. A Sun-supported program is providing households with monthly stipends, which increased by 25% if spent on healthy, diverse foods. So the different color on the plate that's so essential to a child.
And so it's an incentive to people, really, to pick foods that will be healthier. They'll get paid more.
Totally. And I think in that way, we see that there's an influence in one area. But I also want to talk about something Francesco touched on, is supporting government regulations on the harmful marketing of food and beverages for children, for example, by sharing experiences on how to tax on sugar-sweetened beverages, through front-of-pack labeling that's so important to know what's in the ingredients. And there, Sun has helped facilitate the sharing of best practices, and those taxes on sugary sweetened beverages can also perhaps provide additional financing to improve nutrition investments. So we really have to look at the full spectrum of what's out there to influence nutrition outcomes, including, for example, water and sanitation, which I don't feel we talk enough about. A lot of children die early on in life due to a combination of infectious disease and malnutrition. So clear investments in water and sanitation with improved availability of nutritious food can really lead to optimum processes and growth for children. So the more we bring in this multi-sector approach, the more we can improve nutrition outcomes.
Brio, I want to bring you in on this topic because I said at the beginning, we need to think differently. It's no longer about a charitable enterprise where we're just donating money from the rich world to the poor world to buy food. It's much more of a systems approach. Sean picked up on that and said, you know, people are sometimes feeling that we've not succeeded. We've tried so hard. Why are we still talking about nutrition? There's a sense that, you know, we don't know how to do this. Then Francesco said, listen, we're actually spending trillions of dollars on this already. You know, we're spending it by not addressing the issues, lost productivity and health outcomes that are bad for people. So in a way, you could have a Nutrition for Growth conference in March that says, we need to raise money, we need to donate money. But there is a different way of thinking about this maybe that's much broader, and I think Afshan has given us a great couple of examples here, that you can use regulation to raise funds, you can use regulation to inspire better behavior. So how are you thinking about sort of the big opportunity that we can shift the approach to the entire food system, not just donating to achieve the results we want?
That's a tricky question, but thanks for asking. I believe, yes, indeed, there's a change in paradigm that we need to discuss. As a matter of fact, the problem for us is not getting more money for nutrition; it's getting more nutrition for money, and an expression that I stole from my friend Mira Shikar from the World Bank. This is the thing. I think nutrition involves policies that can be costly, but also policies that can be relatively inexpensive, which involve changing the view of what the food burden, for instance, which is a big part of the gender gap, the food burden that is on the women's shoulders. This is something that can be changed, and by bringing the boys, for instance, in schools, in the kitchen to prepare the lunch for the rest of the kids, and change their culture and change their approach of the importance of food. That's one example of nutrition policy that can be implemented. It's also about challenging the private sector into new forms of production, and this is something we are actually intending to do, and engaging with the private sector and show them how profitable the investment in nutrition can be. This is the development policy which has the highest return on investment ever. It's a factor 23. You plan $100 million in a country on policy sensitive or specific nutrition sensitive or specific policies, and you get $2.3 billion or euros in GDP in return, and sometimes you get to a factor of 53. So this is something really interesting, because you can also tell companies that they have every interest in investing on that and supporting the transformation of food systems in those countries. So this is something also we are trying to do, and I'm happy that we have a lot of support from a number of companies whose members, whose representatives I actually see in the public. So it's very encouraging.
Yeah, it seems like this is a common thread in many ways across a lot of development topics, whether they're in health or education. It's that we're living in a very challenging political moment when it comes to raising grant dollars. And so people who are maybe traditionally civil engineers, or they come from an agricultural engineering background, they have to become financial engineers now. And they have to think of new ways to develop private markets and guide those markets to have the kind of development outcomes we want to see. One of those areas is fortification, right? Developing products that actually have the nutritional profile that meet people's needs, whether it's after the product has been grown and harvested or a product that's biofortified. And that's maybe one example where the private sector can play a big role, everyone from the individual farmer all the way to the big corporation. I wonder, Francesco, if you can talk a little bit about what's the leading science and technology. We're learning more about the microbiome. What's the leading technology that can drive us to address these challenges more holistically?
So no, you're right saying that fortification is a good example of the engagement with the private sector. We have a long history of fortification, and fortification has been introduced because vitamins and minerals were stripped off from the original staples. So anyway, it was fixing a problem that had been created. But fortification has been a successful story in many countries. It doesn't fully address the problems of vitamins and minerals, because not everybody is actually reached by those products. Other technologies, certainly we need to have health systems which are able to deliver the interventions, because let's say that for a series of reasons then the nutrition problem appears. Who is fixing it? And so we do need a health system which is able to resolve that. Vitamins and minerals, yes, we do have supplements that can fix the problem. They can actually prevent children from being born too small. Iron folic acid supplement. Do you know how many women are actually reached by that very easy, very cheap intervention? 1/3 of all the possible who could receive that. Now we have even different, richer multiple micronutrient supplement who can do that. So that's just one. But we also have other aspects, other food design, especially to address undernutrition. We have, we have a colleague in the audience who really has been instrumental to the development of this very important measure to address the acute forms of malnutrition.
These are ready-to-use therapeutic foods?
These are the ready-to-use therapeutic foods. We save a lot of lives. So these are just examples of technologies that can fix the problem. Of course, we want to have a system that prevents the problem. We want to have a system where we're able to provide the right counseling on food to women and children. We want to have a health system where we're able to make diagnosis of the problem, whether it's undernutrition or obesity. We want to have a system which are providing quality care. So that's why we need better trained health workers. We need to have essential medicine lists that provide all those products free of charge. We need to have a good monitoring of the situation. We need to have, for example, data information. Yeah, what you mentioned about artificial intelligence is actually helpful, for example, to have a better mapping of the needs of the population through data collected at primary care level.
John, I want to get you're welcome to comment on what you just heard, because I know this is an area you work a lot on, but you also chair this independent expert panel, which is part of the Paris Peace Forum, on nutrition. I think one reason why it's so logical that it's convened by the Paris Peace Forum is that nutrition, like so many other issues, is being greatly affected by conflict, by climate, and those two things are interacting. And this is something you have to deal with and work on every day. You live in West Africa and where your organization operates. So talk to us a little bit about how nutrition is connected to some of these bigger themes we're talking about at the Paris Peace Forum, and what is the way forward?
Thanks for that, Raj. And I think that was going to be the second part, perhaps, of what I was saying, is that on one hand, we certainly have a lot of examples of progress, as Francesco and Afshan has laid out. We also, our knowledge base, both of what to do and how to do it, is improving every day. And so that's the positive side. But in fact, all this progress is also fundamentally imperiled by all these conflation of crises. You look at the food price crisis, which is now chronic. There are recent analyses from the International Food Policy Research Institute that show that a 5% increase of food prices translates into a 9% increase of wasting, the deadliest form of malnutrition. And that 9% is not evenly distributed. It's those households who are already the most at risk. Conflicts, I could, anytime want to visit a country that is becoming increasingly conflict, I visit Burkina Faso, where my family is from. Major parts of the country, the health system is just broken down because those health workers have been targeted. And farmers can't grow, moms can't go to the market. And I think the most existential crisis is the climate crisis. The Goalkeepers report that was published in September was very telling, that saying the likeliest driver of increased mortality from the climate crisis is going to be due to increased rates of malnutrition. And one of the most important things we can do to, in fact, stop the worst manifestations of the climate crisis is going to be investing more in nutrition. So I would say, as I was hearing around the room today, almost every topic being discussed has a direct relationship to nutrition. But there's also a danger of weight, because I think too often the idea is, well, we're going to first stop the war against Ukraine and then we'll deal with the nutritional fallout. Or we're going to stop the pandemic and then we'll deal with the nutritional fallout. Or we're going to stop the climate crisis. But in fact, as people have said, what happens in that 1,000-day window, you either lock in good nutrition potential forever, or you lock in that damage and you have generational consequences. So good nutrition cannot wait. It is the first thing to suffer in any crisis, and we need to make sure we deploy the means necessarily to protect particularly the most vulnerable populations, particularly women and children, in face of any crisis. And we have the means to do it. We have the knowledge to do it. And that's why I think the timing of this next Nutrition for Growth Summit is particularly important, because we might not solve every crisis in the world, but the crisis of malnutrition, we absolutely can solve if we have the political will and the resources.
I think Sean makes a compelling argument, Afshan, but you have to go to donors and convince them that this is the place to invest among many, many other competing areas of focus and interest. And it's tough. The political environment has gotten harder. The resource picture is tougher. How do you think about how nutrition can find its way in this new reality we're facing, where official development assistance budgets are not going up anymore? In many countries in Europe, they are flat or down. In the US, they've been relatively flat, but are likely to go down. How does this community find a way forward, given those political and financial realities?
Thanks, Raj. And this is a really important question, as development budgets have been flatlined and we're seeing a need for increased resources due to conflict and climate that Sean talked about. I think, first of all, and Brieux made the point, we have to be clear that this is an investment. And that investment is also linked to the human capital. The loss of human capital that's brought about by not investing in nutrition in that first 1,000 days is a 15 to 25% loss in human capital for that child's life. And that's huge. That means the opportunity cost, and we heard a lot on earlier panels, about the number of youth, the number of children that are in the largest cohort of youth now currently in the world. That really needs to change if we're going to build the societies we want to build. The second thing I would say is to be really clear on the rate of return on investment. And then the third thing, I think, is not just looking at explicit investments in nutrition alone, but what do nutrition investments lead to in other sectors? You know, what difference does it make in social protection that I spoke about earlier? What difference does it make in climate financing, for example? I don't know why we don't have a climate financing target for nutrition. The malnutrition rates have gone up exponentially where we've seen climate crises, whether it's drought or floods in Somalia or in Bangladesh, or now listening to the foreign minister of Colombia in Colombia today, without the possibility of being able to invest and tackle those crises. So I think we need additional climate finance for both adaptation and as well as mitigation, right? Secondly, I would say we need to get a lot better at leveraging key sources of resources. And part of that is more resources from domestic finance. We need to look at budget efficiencies and what can be done to better tag, track, and monitor budgets of what's being invested in nutrition. Maximize the existing sources of financing from bilateral and international institutions. And here I'd like to thank Brieux. He's done a lot of work on working with development banks to see what they can do. I don't think we've leveraged sufficiently the development banks in terms of looking at a mix of concessional financing and grant financing. Thirdly, I know there's a number of philanthropies in the room. They can do a lot to perhaps de-risk some of the investments that are being made. We know that there's a real reticence to take additional concessional financing because it's loan financing. But if a philanthropy can come in and say, we're willing to match and offset that debt burden, you can make a big difference on what governments are willing to take on as concessional financing. And I think the World Bank investment framework for nutrition has really laid the groundwork for what's the strategic action that's needed, you know? And the money that is needed for nutrition, if you look at it, even amongst some of the least developed countries, the amount of funds that we're talking about relative to what's spent on military investments or other areas is nominal, right? It is nominal. So I do think we need to push harder on getting more resources towards nutrition. I think I'm looking at a couple of colleagues here, what investment can be made from businesses to produce quality, nutritious food at the local level, at the national level, is an extremely important source of financing as well. And ultimately, the data shows that the bulk of nutritious foods that are purchased at the local level come from small and medium enterprises. So how do we create investment opportunities in those businesses to make sure that they're creating nutritious food at an affordable price so people can purchase food that's healthy and nutritious?
Yeah, I just want to underline a point you're making because I think it's really important that you brought to the table the idea of investment, that we need to think about that lens, which is very connected to the idea of health systems, or food systems as well. Because if you think of feeding people as a charitable activity, people are hungry and we are going to provide a charitable form of food, it's hard to see how the financial engineering works to bring in investment and loans and to bring in all the players you mentioned, the multilateral development banks, the private sector. But if you think of food systems, there's a role for everyone to play. You mentioned, water and sanitation. That's an investable area, right? That's a place where people today, even very poor people, spend money to get access to water. So these are areas where you can have real investment. And I think that's a different frame that, you're right, has potential. It's potential not just to bring in the bilateral providers of official development assistance, but to bring in a much larger circle of players against this. And it does require, though, that governments see it that way. And Francesco, maybe I can bring you in on this point, and then I'm going to come to people in the audience as well to hear from you. But it seems like what's different about this perspective, it's not a nonprofit flying in from overseas and providing food. This is about a government taking charge of its own food system and its health system and having its own strategy and bringing in the multilateral development banks, the development finance institutions, the local and global private sector. So what do you tell governments? What are the policy shifts they need to make to drive this kind of approach?
So no, thanks for the question. And first of all, I think we need to acknowledge the fact that we have seen a transformation. So there have been some countries who have really taken the leadership to decide that the food system should be shaped by government policies, by regulatory policies, by investments that shape the markets, and we have actually excellent examples in countries in South America, where the situation has been so dramatic in terms, for example, of numbers of people living with obesity, which was overlapped with the still problems of undernutrition. So you have this multiple forms of malnutrition were actually coexisting in the same country. So that was so compelling. They've taken some very bold regulatory measures. If you think, Ashan was mentioning earlier on the taxation of sugar-sweetened beverages. Actually, now you have quite a large number of countries who are doing that. Colombia is also established a very pioneering law to tax unhealthy foods. So there are countries who are making those shifts. We mentioned, the communication to the consumers through labeling. France is also a champion country in this. We've seen policies to restrict marketing food to children. So we are seeing bold policies to reshape the food environment. We've seen investment in public food procurement. I mean, the purchasing of food in schools, in hospitals, in canteens of the ministries. That's an enormously powerful way to shape the demand. So it's not just the individual consumers, but the public policies that make the shift. So we have a lot of learning, and we have a lot of good practices, and that can encourage others to follow the good examples. Yeah.
And those are great examples because it does take some political will, but it doesn't necessarily take a lot of resources, right? Many governments are already doing procurement, and you're asking them to do it in a different way that shapes the market.
It's political capital that needs to be spent, and that's not easy because, unfortunately, you're mentioning the private sector. Fortunately, certain private sector is trying to interfere with that policy making, so it's not helping. But
I'm sure, much of the private sector that provides unhealthy food wouldn't like to see their product taxed, of course. But it does show that some countries have found a way through that challenge, and when they do, they're able to both generate resources and encourage healthier behaviors. I know we have a lot of expertise in the audience, and I want to hear from some of you. I know Agnes Sukat is with us from the AFD, that's France's development agency, where you lead the health portfolio. I see you here in the front row, so I would love to see if you might ask a question. We have a microphone, or tell us how you see these issues.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the Paris Peace Forum for organizing this great panel, and thanks to the speakers. I just wanted to add to what the speaker said about mobilizing all sources of financing as we are moving towards the Nutrition for Growth Summit. It's important, in my view, as you all mentioned, that we activate all the levers that we have on financing. It's about private financing. Most of nutrition is produced by households, by people, and it's through what they purchase. This is through what they produce. But it's been mentioned, is how we also mobilize public financing through social protection program. It's been our experience, particularly in public development banks, that we really can reach poor people who are the most vulnerable to price changes and crisis, to reach them through social protection program linked with nutrition programs. And also the question of climate change, and indeed the fact that the impact on health and nutrition will come in the years to come, mostly from environmental crisis. And we know we already have in Madagascar the first climate-driven famine. So maybe the last thing I wanted to emphasize was you mentioned the World Bank and public development banks. When we talk about money, public development banks mobilize 2.3 trillion per year. So if only 5% or 10% of that would be reoriented towards the combination of social protection program and nutrition program, we would go a long way, and this would be really helpful in shaping markets. 2.3 trillion.
I think it's a fantastic statistic and point that Agnes is bringing to us. Brio, maybe I can come to you on this, because it seems like what makes this hard, it's not just that the multilateral development banks are stubborn and they refuse to invest in this area. I think what makes it hard is they need to see all levels of the capital stack, as they call it, aligned. They need to see government policy lined up. They need to see maybe insurance to protect investments. Maybe they need philanthropy to be present to de-risk, as Afshan said, the food system in the country or the health system in the country. So there's many pieces that have to be put together, and that's really what you're trying to put together. So tell us what you hear from the multilateral development banks when you look to make the case for that 2.3 trillion to be directed more in this area.
Well, thank you for that. I beg to differ. A few days ago I was in Washington, and what I understood, what I sensed was a strong interest from development banks regarding nutrition, and I believe we're going to get some good news in the days ahead, in the coming days, encouraging at least, and we're working very hard to get the development banks on board, but not only. It's also about investment funds, pension funds that we're working with, and we've got priceless partnerships with our friends from civil society specialized in engaging with the private sector, thinking of AT&I and GAIN and others who really know very well this sector and know how to address this. But one thing you mentioned is that nutrition is super connected with many other fields of development. If you look at the summits we're organizing in France, next year we have the Summit on Artificial Intelligence, and we have, for instance, the United Nations Conference on Oceans. These are two topics that are related to nutrition. In fact, nutrition is at the core of IA and Oceans Nexus. So we deal as well with artificial intelligence, we deal with blue food, and this is why nutrition is so effective, because it is related to almost every field of activity that development policies can implement. So I think this is something that rings a bell, for development banks, and I'm pretty confident we'll get them on board. And what we are working on is exactly what you say, getting everybody on the same line, which is why we want N4G to be a very inclusive summit in which, through which we talk to the private sector, we talk to the insurance sector, the financial sector, and soldiering on.
Yeah, that's the right fight to be having. I want to open this to others, but let me just see if we have anyone else from our audience who wants to contribute a question or a thought for the panel. And while they think about this, I'm going to turn to you, Sean, on this, because you brought up climate finance, which is an area that the MDBs are very interested in. And you said, look, can't we get some piece of that, given that nutrition is... You're having these conversations. What do you hear? Are you hearing what Brio is hearing? Is there real interest and demand from the climate finance community, including the MDBs?
So I think when it comes to the development banks, I probably am relatively bullish, and I think Ambassador Pont will be sharing good news soon. I do think there's a real challenge with the climate community, and a couple of data points to support that. The World Bank Investment Framework in Nutrition analyzed climate financing and could barely find anything going to nutrition. And we looked at a broader definition of child-centered investments. All these global climate financing facilities, 2.4% goes to child-centered investments. So imagine nutrition, if it's even there, is something smaller. And even when you go into fora where the global health community is talking about the impacts of climate change on health, the surge in rates of malnutrition is barely ever mentioned. So I think when it comes to the link between the climate crisis and food systems, it's resonating more, but it's still not put the nutrition crisis of the food system crisis at the heart of those discussions. So I think we have a lot more to do to really bring the climate community and the nutrition community next to each other, because, and then I go back to it, the evidence is there, but also the lived experience is there. I mean, I have the good fortune of being back at Helen Keller and the amount of where I live in Senegal, but just all my travels. When you speak to farmers, when you speak to fishers, they don't speculate about the climate crisis. This is their lived experience now. And so the only thing friendly amendment I would make to what Agnes said, if you talked about the future, it's happening right now that the climate crisis is driving increased rates of malnutrition. So I do think there's a compelling argument to make, both from people who are understanding this, the lived experience, and the data that are coming out. And I think it's one of the areas where we really need to get much more aggressive understanding the links between the climate crisis, and that one of the best things we can do invest in to reduce the horrible consequences on people's lives is to invest more in nutrition, and we know what to do about it.
Well, and in an environment where it's hard to make the case for funding in the US and Europe, there's a clear national security link, which is one of the arguments that often needs to be made to skeptical parliaments or congresses, right? That if today people are finding that climate change is affecting their ability to find food where they live, it could lead to real instability today, not something, as you say, far off in the future and needs to be addressed. Again, let me open it up and see if anyone here has, we have a couple, so we have a microphone. Maybe you can bring it to the gentleman in the back. Is the mic working? Go ahead. We're not hearing you. Are you?
Just barely?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah? Okay, let's try that. So thanks so much for an excellent panel, really fantastic. Nutrition has such an incredible investment case and such a strong evidence base behind so many interventions. You've done a great job of explaining this, but on a panel that talks about the priorities, it can sometimes feel a little bit difficult to navigate. So I'm not going to ask you to choose your single favorite intervention, but I will ask it in a slightly different way. If I were to say to each of you, you have $10 million, you can spend it any way that you would like. You could scale up a single intervention. You could invest in a single context. You could try to de-risk other forms of capital or any other way you'd want to spend it. I'd love to hear from one or two of you or all of you how you'd spend that money.
And can I just ask, I'm sorry I didn't say your name and your organization, if you would.
I think you were asking, my name is Matt Freeman. I'm the Executive Director of Stronger Foundations for Nutrition, which is a global philanthropic network. Thanks so much.
And we'll take one more question if we can pass the mic here to the front. And we'll take both of these together. This gentleman here.
Yeah, thanks. Steve Godfrey from GAIN. Yeah, Raj, I thought this whole focus on investment was really interesting. The question I'd like to ask the panelists is, when you think about the worlds that you need to come together for this kind of different investment, you think what drives companies, market sentiment, quarterly reporting, you think how governments work, the constraints of governments with lots of priorities. Do you think as a nutrition community we're good enough at really bringing together these very different worlds, very different styles and cultures of work? And if we think it's important, so again, development finance institutions work on very strict investment criteria. They want to keep their AA+, they have to make rates of return. Sometimes they'd like to get subsidies from donors, but the donors won't give them the subsidies. So how do you get these really different worlds to work together for this bigger common objective? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. You're welcome, our panelists here, to address both or one of these, but maybe we can start with Matt's question, because we are here to talk about priorities. So what would you do with an incremental $10 million? Where would you put it? Francesca, do you want to get us started?
I would train community health workers in nutrition. We've seen that whenever this happens, nutrition is dramatically improved. Tanzania, Kenya.
Yeah, and that's a relatively underutilized resource in many of the countries that face the biggest burden. There's community health workers, a big opportunity, in fact. Afshan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think I would also focus very clearly on that first 1,000 days. I just think if you explicitly want to make the most difference in the longer term human capital, it is that first 1,000 days. So how, through community health workers, through supporting families and communities, do you make that shift? But I also wanted to come back to Steve's question, because to me, part of the challenge in generating this buzz around nutrition is being able to bring the different stakeholders to the table. And I still want to come back a little bit to the purpose of SUN and why it was created. And that was really to recognize civil society, small and medium enterprises, government, donor partners, and now academia as well, coming back to the research and evidence, which is so important, have to work together at the country level. And if we take the premise that it has to be nationally led and nationally driven, we can come back to what do we need to do as stakeholders to make sure that we're supporting government so that they have the decision-making power and capacity to use the best instruments and tools that are available to them to make the shifts they need in the country. And that's their choice, to select from that toolbox how best can they ameliorate the conditions in country. And that's where I think this practice of peer-to-peer exchanges amongst countries has been so useful. So how have we leveraged small and medium enterprises in a Tanzania, and how do you bring that to a Nigeria or, you know, another set of countries? I really think we underestimate how much potential there is from countries to learn from one another, and our role in helping facilitate that as a community, as communities of practice.
Yeah, it's certainly necessary, I think, to do what Steve is talking about, to bring these worlds that are very different culturally, that speak their own languages, to bring them together with nutrition. But it's not sufficient. You still need the country to have a plan, because the multilateral development bank or an investor, they're not going to go there if they don't think there is a national plan that makes sense and that's investable. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's been another big part of the SUN movement, is supporting these national nutrition plans. Now, if these national nutrition plans, coming back to climate, can be better linked to the nationally determined contributions that are now being developed for the next COP in Belém, we can have a clear win if we can make sure that the nutrition elements of climate smart investments are explicitly outlined. So we have a lot to do to take that going forward. There's a network called ICANN that's helping with the analysis of some of that, using AI to digest what is out there already and what more can be done. But I really think the onus here is on how best do we support national governments to do this work in a meaningful way.
Dawn, you've operated some of the bigger nutrition budgets in the world in your various jobs in your lifetime. What would you do with that incremental $10 million if you had it?
Well, first of all, Matt, thank you for that $10 million check. And so I actually will steal some of what Francesco said. If you go back to the Lancet Nutrition Series in 2021, it said one of the quickest ways is to close the opportunity gap in the health system. Because unfortunately, you know, a mom comes in for prenatal services. We don't even give her nutrition counseling or the basic nutrient supplements. It's the same thing. And we do know that community health workers are, in fact, the most able to deliver this. So, in fact, it would be focusing first, because that's where we can get the immediate bang right now. I do want to build the systems to really empower community health workers. And the second thing I would do is actually then support those community health workers to organize and do what community health workers in Kenya did, to say, go to government, go to parliament and say, we are doing serious work here. We deserve to be integrated into the health system and remunerated. And that will be, I think, one of the critical things will change the face. Because one of the challenges in nutrition compared to some of the other global challenges, we don't have the natural activist group. We don't have wasted and stunted children marching on Parliament saying we need our right. I think activating those community health workers both as a workforce to deliver good nutrition and a voice of seeing the damage of bad nutrition and the benefits of good nutrition can truly be transformational.
And I'll just add to that, in an era where the budgets are going down, 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 from official development assistance, there's no room for inefficiency anymore. And one of the big inefficiencies are community health workers who are unpaid. They're given vertical programs. They're told to talk about malaria today and tomorrow will be, some other issue. And if we can better utilize those resources that already exist, that can be a real game changer across health and nutrition.
I also think so many governments are so concerned about job creation. And this is giving community health workers a standard stipend is also part of it. And also there's a huge gender inequity because so many of these community health workers are women. And it's just unethical that they don't get a proper remuneration.
Yeah. Brio, I want to end our panel with you in the few minutes we have left because, it's easy for us to pontificate. Of course, everyone here has important roles in this, but you're in the hot seat. You are leading the next big initiative for nutrition for the world. And you have a hard date
no pressure
that you're leading to. Yeah, no pressure. So what can this community, which, as Steve says, maybe it's a bunch of different worlds that need to come together, what can these worlds do, these communities do, people who attend this forum do to help drive the change you're trying to lead?
Well, I must say I'm as many of you know, I'm not an expert of nutrition at all. People need to beware of diplomats, but above all, beware of diplomats who pretend to be an expert. And those are the most dangerous species. But what I found was a community that was very much into the belly button syndrome and navel gazing. And there were churches and some people who were advocating for RUTFs, other for food systems transformation and what have you. And I think that I've noticed some change as we form these mountaineers ropes parties that are climbing up to the summit. Because people tend to forget that below the summit there is always a mountain and you need to climb it, right? And I think everybody now in this community is acknowledging that all forms of intervention may be useful depending on the context, and that we need carefully designed policies for each country, for each problem. And when they are well designed, they can produce, very transformative effects. And that's what makes us move, basically, because we know it's efficient. So I would say I've seen that change. I'm happy to. Don't know if people call me special envoy. I always say, you call me special after the summit. We'll see if, But right now, what we're trying to do is get everybody on board, get everybody together, and try to deliver a successful summit. And one thing that is very key is making nutrition popular. Not only as a food labeling policy, Nutri-Score is great, we all know that, but it's not the only thing about nutrition. There's plenty of other things we can do. So against food wasting, I mentioned the blue foods. There's plenty of interventions that we can run. And this is the idea, to make nutrition popular. We need to raise awareness in the public. So I'm happy to accept as well the $10 million for a massive worldwide communications campaign. We will actually launch one very soon. And to get everybody on board and make it consensual, and because it works.
Well, I began by saying that this is a space that, like artificial intelligence, deserves our attention because there's a lot happening here. And I think like AI, it's something we can all feel really connected to personally in our personal lives, our family lives, our community, our country. It's not just for another group of people somewhere on the other side of the world. And I think what's so important about what you're doing and what Nutrition for Growth does is using the platform of the Olympics. It really elevates this to a level that every person on this earth needs to pay attention to. I really appreciate the Paris Peace Forum bringing it here and all of you being a part of it. Please join me in thanking this fantastic panel.